Carlo Dadone was an Italian writer remembered mostly for his children's books. Born in 1864 in Turin, he suffered from serious visual and hearing impairment, yet he would write a large amount of adventure novels and articles published in various magazines. His early life had been harsh. According to Francesco Pastonci, who met Dadone in 1896, he had attempted to commit suicide at a young age by shooting himself in the head. Dadone initially released his novels and stories in the magazine Forum, the director of which was his friend Giovanni Bertinetti. His stories for children initially appeared in the Adolescenza and Corriere del Piccoli magazines. His first novel, How I Got Married, the autobiography of an ex-Wolverine, was published in 1902, but his first really successful novel was the adventure story Il Tesoro del Re Negro, the treasure of the Black King. One of his most famous children's books is his The Adventures of Caperina, which has been described as a feminine take on Pinocchio. Luigi Pirandello and Giuseppe Giacosa had both compared Dadone to Edgar Allan Poe, though Pirandello advised him in a letter to return to his playful humour and to leave the ghosts to Poe. Dadone also wrote books with a certain political bent, such as his 1927 Communism in Roccaferigna, A Story of Yesterday, which was a story written in support of Catholic values, and his Journey of a Table Around the World, published in the year of his death. He died at Turin in 1931. Nino Maraldi's Madness, or in the original Nino Maraldi's Irrsinn, is a German collection of 4 stories by Dadone, which was the only one of his works that I have thus far been able to access in a language I can understand. The title novella deals with a man who falls in love with Maria, a woman who refuses to tell him about her home, her family, or even her last name, and keeps postponing the reveal for weeks on end. The narrator's rich friend Nino Maraldi falls madly in love with her in the meantime, stalking her as she goes home, sending her a proposal of marriage on the second day after having met her, and then on the day when Maria is to reveal to the protagonist her secret, she disappears along with Maraldi. 2 years later, the narrator uncovers Maraldi's hiding place in a secluded house in the countryside by pure chance, and attempts to free Maria, whom he had glimpsed for a single moment in a window on the bottom floor. But he is thwarted by a vicious old rogue, whom he at first supposes to be Maraldi's servant, who ends up trying to force the narrator and Maraldi to fight a duel to the death for the girl, and then absconds with her despite his solemn oaths that he will do no such thing. Several years later, the narrator is put on the trail of Maria by finding his friend Maraldi gripped in the strain of a self-aggrandizing madness, locked in an insane asylum where he hails himself as the greatest inventor and genius in the world. But his reunion with Maria is short-lived, and ends in tragedy, murder, imprisonment, prison break, and a new life in America. A most unusual case is the story of Asmodeo Gerundio, met after many years by an old friend in the street. Asmodeo is soon complaining to his friend that his shoemaker didn't make his shoes as small as he wished, and thus they were actually somewhat comfortable, so Asmodeo stuck some rocks inside and then a few nails just for good measure. He then proceeds to say how he grew to hate himself and his own pleasure, and has spent years torturing himself in new and varied ways, all due to the self-love and laziness of his deceased wife. A wife that died of starvation due to the simple fact she didn't wish to move in order to feed herself. Asmodeo's obsession with causing himself pain extends to the point of training dogs to attack him in his sleep, sleeping on the floor covered with stones, wearing summer clothes in winter, and wishing for nothing else but eternal damnation. In fact, at one point in their discussion, he chides the narrator because the narrator pulled him out of the way of an oncoming car, which Asmodeo says could have at least broken a few of his bones. The story is perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the morbid, inventive masochism of Asmodeo can be quite bizarre to read about. The last two stories are purely humorous, but will be covered for the sake of completion. Of the birth and death of the White Fly is the story of a group of ne'er-do-well writers, poets and artists, and how they managed to run a private artistic journal to the ground through their endless boozing and romancing of the local hairdressers, leaving their sponsor relieved of quite a lot of cash, and with an effigy of his own precious self hung from the ceiling, made up from the crushed-up volumes of his precious literary journal. Seneca's advice is the tale of a shy young man who puts out an ad in the newspaper seeking someone to engage in love correspondence with, and then finds the personage who kept responding to his letters one day, and decides to take a run for it, saved at the last moment by public transport. The stories, when serious or semi-serious, are full of madness, insanity, abductions, romantic rivalry, nervous diseases, not to mention a good dose of doom, gloom and masochism. And it certainly makes me excited to find and review more of Dadone's work.